Hello and welcome to my presentation. I'd like to share my case study with you today on intergenerational knowledge transfer in the workplace, which includes critical knowledge identification, knowledge sharing, and the innovation of new knowledge. My name is Rosanna Burkey. I'm a PhD student in the Penn State University Workforce Education program currently. I'm also an organization development practitioner. I've been in the field for about 25 years, and I've been in my own business for about the last 11 or 12 years. So you will see a mix in my presentation as well as my studies of practitioner and researcher. I'd like to start off the presentation with an opening poll. I'd like you to take your best guess. How many of your coworkers are currently retirement eligible or will be retirement eligible within the next 3 to 5 years? What percent of your department does this equal? My presentation is divided into the main sections that you see on the PowerPoint screen: the problem statement, the purpose statement, research questions, literature review, methodology, and my research phases. My objective today is to share the information with you about the demographic shift in the United States labor force and how intergenerational knowledge transfer is one approach organizations are using to minimize their risk to organization-wide knowledge loss due to retirements of their experts. I divided my presentation into 4 major sections. First, the introduction, then the literature review, my methodology, and then my phases of research. So let me give you a little background on the research that I've done on intergenerational knowledge transfer. I came across some conceptual framework that gives organizations and also organization development consultants and researchers some models to look at that are more prescriptive, meaning there's a creating IKT, which means intergenerational knowledge transfer, leaders model. So this is a model that is prescriptive in that it explains how to create strong leaders that will support, sustain, provide the resources needed, time, money, people to keep knowledge transfer going and alive in their organization as a major development tool. Then there's the intergenerational knowledge transfer culture model, which talks about how the key stakeholders in this process are very broad, from the employee themselves to the leaders in the organization to the human resource professionals in this organization to the organizational development consultants in this picture, the managers, the supervisors. Everybody has a key role in creating a culture where knowledge transfer is an accepted practice and becomes part of people's job to pass on their expert knowledge to other employees. You'll see at the bottom of the screen some workplace literature I found on intergenerational knowledge transfer. The foundation of knowledge transfer is truly mentoring, apprenticeships, and reverse mentoring programs. So I went back that far because that is the origin of how knowledge began to be shared in the workplace. Then what I looked at is, okay, how are experts, how are consultants identifying what the critical knowledge is that these experts that are retiring, that they should be passing on to other generations of employees. Knowledge sharing across generations has quite a bit of research backing it because of it's very difficult to separate the multiple generations from the phenomenon of so many people retiring at one time at this point in our business history. So they kind of go together. And finally, through the collaborative process of knowledge sharing and knowledge transfer, oftentimes new knowledge is innovated with the help of both generations. So the subject matter expert and the person that they're sharing the knowledge with that's remaining with the organization. So the problem statement. Within the next 5 to 10 years, US businesses will be losing 25% of their experienced employees to retirements. 25% is about 41 million soon to retire employees, and they have a wealth of tacit knowledge. Tacit knowledge meaning they know the business, they know the product, the process, the equipment, they know the way to navigate the organization. It's the knowledge that isn't written down. So if you think about 25% of your workforce leaving, an organization is at high risk of major organization-wide knowledge loss because you're combining all of those people together. And in certain departments, like the target organization I'm working with, they're at 40% are soon to retire. So that's a major risk of knowledge loss, major risk to disruption of business because you're losing all that expert knowledge in a short amount of time. So according to existing literature and studies conducted on the increasingly age-diverse workforce, intergenerational knowledge transfer has been found to be a viable workforce development tool organizations can employ to minimize the potential knowledge loss. And this is the focus of my study. So the purpose. This intergenerational knowledge transfer qualitative case study examines the methods an organization is using to identify and share critical knowledge across an age-diverse labor force and explores the process of new knowledge creation occurring through the knowledge transfer process. So I have four main research questions. Research question 1 is, how is critical knowledge identified currently? And then through the process, we are going to, or we did identify the critical knowledge in the pilot study that I conducted, and I want to share that. Research question 2, how is critical knowledge shared across generations of employees? How were they sharing it before I came in to the pilot? And how have we used different methods and different ways of sharing knowledge as part of the pilot? And then as part of that sharing process, you'll find that often new knowledge is created, especially when you have an expert and someone who is not necessarily brand new to their field. So you have a baby boomer who's soon to retire, and then you have a Generation X individual who has been with the company for 15, 20 years. That's a very robust conversation that they have when they're sharing knowledge. So it's very bidirectional, and that's where you'll see new knowledge being created. The fourth question evolved from the case study because there's a huge piece of knowledge transfer that is sometimes left out in research, which is how can we sustain this knowledge transfer process as a major development tool that this organization, that this department will continue to use to continue to educate their employees for years to come. My research methodology and my analytical methods. So it's a qualitative approach. I think that's the best way to get at the richness of the whole relationship piece of the knowledge transfer process. And I can explain the dynamics, and also quantitative just didn't quite fit or give me enough flexibility for my study. I'm using a pragmatic worldview, which means when I look at a situation, I look at it as how can this work in the real world of business and industry. And that's how I view most research. So I wanted to be upfront in that's how I will approach my case study. Case study is my research design, because I think it gives a great example for other companies and organizations to look at after we're finished, to say, this is one way that an organization mitigated their risk to knowledge loss. Here you go, look at this example. Is this something that your organization could do to or benefit from also? I am in my dissertation study looking at using the action learning approach to have a small group of, I'm going to say approximately 26 employees, half soon to retire or retiring employees, the other half staying. So two different generations, perhaps three. So it's a multi-generational group. And I'm going to facilitate them through the process of creating their own knowledge transfer program that works for them in their department and that they're able to sustain. And that's my greater dissertation study. The data collection tools that I've used in my pilot study, which I conducted this summer, August 31st was the last day for my pilot study. So I still need to do all of my data analysis, but I used one-on-one interviews with human resource managers and also functional managers of the departments that needed this, or who have the most need. I have did observing during the knowledge sharing sessions throughout my pilot study, just watching the dynamics, making notes of what I saw. Individual sessions, I spent a lot of time with two specific subject matter experts, which their leaders, their managers identified as these are the two people that are leaving the students and have the greatest amount of expert knowledge. We want you to work with them. So those individual sessions were first starting out with knowledge mapping, and then we moved into knowledge sharing, where we brought in other people so that they could share their knowledge with that person. We didn't move into group sessions yet, but that will be part of my greater study. And I also used an online survey as part of my pilot to get some feedback from the peers throughout this department that I was working with on knowledge transfer, their thoughts on where the department is at, the strategy, how they think the department, we should be looking at knowledge transfer and utilizing it, and how are they currently passing on information. So the focus of my pilot study was to look at the identification of critical knowledge, the sharing of that knowledge, and then the new knowledge creation. What evolved from that pilot study was an additional item, which you'll see on this slide, which is the sustainability of intergenerational knowledge transfer, which I will include as the fourth aspect in my main study, which again will be an action learning approach where the employees in the organization will be creating the knowledge transfer program. Like I said, I'm just getting into the data analysis section of my pilot study, but my thought is to first use open coding. I have a lot of field notes. I have transcripts from all the interviews, all the one-on-one sessions, all the knowledge sharing sessions. So I'd like to first see, what the in vivo program sees as recurring themes. I'd also like to look, there's certain things that I would like to look for. So I'd like to first see what the software sees, and then enter some information that I'm specifically interested in, and then do some focus coding to wrap things up. So my thought is it'll be a very descriptive findings section, and that there's a lot of data, lots of data, and a lot of it's dialogue and transcripts. So it's a large volume, and that's from working with these two individuals for about 3.5 months. And my thought is to do this for the pilot study, learn from it, and then on a larger scale, I'll be looking at doing the same analytical approach with my dissertation study. So I'd like to share my preliminary research findings for my pilot study, only because I'm starting with my pilot study findings. It's the same department I'll be working with, not the same people. However, we did learn quite a bit in the pilot study that I will be presenting to this larger group as a data point that they can use to help create their own program. So preliminary findings are identifying critical knowledge with a subject matter expert is very time consuming. It's very valuable. It's necessary, but you definitely need some type of dedicated resource to work with your subject matter experts within the organization. Oftentimes companies wait until right before, a couple months before the person retires, or they bring them back after retirement. I would suggest, once that person announces their retirement, generally you'll have about a year to adjust to that. That would be a good time to start the knowledge mapping process, so that it's a gradual process. And you can also then include the knowledge sharing piece once you've mapped out all of their critical knowledge. Knowledge transfer is most effective when communication is bidirectional, very highly supported in the knowledge transfer research and also in the intergenerational relationships field research. So that interactive collaborative process makes such a richer experience, and it also allows the opportunity for creation of new knowledge, as opposed to one person saying, here's all the information I want to share with you, and kind of like a data dump. This is not what knowledge transfer is. It's very interactive. Management and leadership is very highly concerned, especially those departments where they're being most affected. In this target example, that this organization is losing 40% of their knowledgeable employees. So as a manager and director of that organization, that's purely frightening. That's so much knowledge. The two people that I worked with for the pilot study had over 40 years experience each in their role and with the company. So that's an awful lot of tacit knowledge they possess. So the organization, the leaders are very concerned about losing their, watching their knowledge walk out the door. And it's heightened because this is happening within a very small, window of time. So often, like I mentioned, companies are waiting till it's too late or waiting to the last minute to capture or figure out how to transfer some of this knowledge. It's not due to ambivalence or lack of concern. What I see is just not knowing what to do. Like, how do we address this? How do we capture knowledge? How do we go about doing, conducting knowledge sharing? So some of these experts have been naturally doing it on their own for the last few years, but most of them are untapped resources that somebody needs to guide through a knowledge transfer process. The intergenerational knowledge transfer process is reproducible. So I boiled it down to identification of critical knowledge, knowledge sharing, and creating new knowledge. That is reproducible, but it's very important just in these two individuals that I work with for the pilot. There are two jobs, and the individuals themselves, the experts, are very different. Therefore, the output of what we put together is customized to that person and that job. So it will never look exactly the same, what you put together for each job or person, but the overall process is something you can replicate. Research applications. So first of all, there's a huge potential for business and industry to benefit from this, my main research study, because so many other companies are experiencing the same demographic shift. And if a company wants to know, well, how did this company handle losing, X number of employees? in such a short amount of time. This is a great case example of using knowledge transfer to minimize their risk to knowledge loss. The knowledge transfer research is a substantial part of research, but this study expands that to include innovation of new knowledge. It includes sustainability of a knowledge transfer process, and I'm introducing an active action learning intervention into my main study, which means the employees will be creating their own knowledge transfer program. And that's very unique to the world of knowledge transfer research. And finally, the intergenerational relationships research. Knowledge transfer is a very, very small segment of the intergenerational field of research. However, I think it has a valuable niche. Again, like I mentioned before, you cannot separate the multiple generations of employees and the knowledge transfer right now based on the makeup of our workforce. These two things are inseparable. So you have to work with them both. So that the multi-generational factor is very relevant and has to be considered as part of the whole knowledge transfer process. So I think there is much opportunity to add to the knowledge transfer in the workplace small segment of the intergenerational relationships field. So at this point, I'd like to ask you, what questions do you have? So I'd like to thank you for joining me today. If you have any questions or would like to follow up with me, my email is rcb122@psu.edu, and I would be happy to hear from you. Thank you for your time today.